What if I told you a stray dog risked everything to save a mother and her child from a burning house? And that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. From heart-stopping rescues to uncovering a dark and dangerous past, this is a story of courage, redemption, and a bond that changed a town forever. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments, and let's dive in. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of damp earth and distant pine, a quiet reminder of the seasons changing in Lone Pine, Oregon. Daisy wandered aimlessly along the outskirts of the small town, her wiry fur matted and dusted with the residue of countless restless nights. Her amber eyes scanned the landscape, alert yet distant, as if searching for something lost long ago. She had no home, no one to call her own, just the memory of being left behind in a dilapidated barn, tied to a rusting post, until hunger drove her to chew through the tether and seek out survival. Since then, she had become a creature of instinct. She scavenged behind diners, dodged rocks thrown by irritated teenagers, and slept beneath the cover of bushes. Despite the hardships, there was a flicker of something in Daisy, a yearning for connection, for purpose. But tonight would change everything. As the sun dipped behind the towering pines, casting long shadows across the quiet streets, Daisy's nose twitched. Smoke. It wasn't the comforting smoke of wood stoves warming homes. It was sharp, urgent, and wrong. Her ears perked, and she began to trot toward the source, weaving through backyards and alleyways until she reached the edge of the Bell family's property. The house, nestled on a modest patch of land, stood eerily alight with the glow of flames licking at its edges. Smoke billowed into the night sky, illuminated by the fiery chaos within. A sharp crack echoed as a window shattered, sending embers scattering into the wind. From inside, faint cries punctuated the roar of the fire, desperate, human cries. Daisy froze, her instincts screaming at her to turn away, to flee as she always had in the face of danger. But something rooted her to the spot. Her ears twitched, honing in on the sound of a child's voice calling out. Then came another, a woman's, hoarse and gasping. Without understanding why, Daisy surged forward. Inside the home, Maggie Bell was fighting a losing battle. The fire had started in the kitchen, sparked by faulty wiring in an old appliance. She had woken to the acrid sting of smoke, her throat raw and her lungs burning as she stumbled down the hall toward Levi's room. "Levi!" she choked out, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames. The heat was unbearable, pressing against her skin as she reached the door to his room. Levi, only 7 years old, sat on his bed, wide-eyed and coughing. Maggie rushed to him, wrapping him in her arms. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here," she whispered, though fear clawed at her heart. She tried to lead him toward the window, but her legs buckled as the smoke thickened, her vision blurring. She collapsed onto the floor, pulling Levi close as darkness began to close in. Outside, Daisy's paws skidded on the gravel driveway as she reached the front porch. The heat radiating from the flames was unlike anything she had ever encountered, and for a brief moment she hesitated. Then a sound cut through the noise, a faint whimper. It pierced through her fear, spurring her forward. With a burst of determination, Daisy leapt through the broken window, her paws landing on shards of glass scattered across the smouldering floorboards. The air inside was suffocating, thick with smoke and ash. Daisy's sensitive nose burned, but she pressed on, following the faint scent of the child. She found them in the hallway, Maggie unconscious and Levi barely clinging to awareness. Daisy nudged Levi's arm, barking sharply to rouse him. The boy's tear-streaked face turned toward her, his small hand reaching out instinctively to clutch her fur. With surprising strength, Daisy gripped the sleeve of Levi's pajama top in her teeth, dragging him away from the flames. Each step was a battle as debris rained down around them, but she pushed forward, her instincts driving her toward the safety of the open air. As they reached the porch, Levi coughed violently, tears streaming down his soot-covered cheeks. Daisy nudged him onto the grass, her focus shifting back to the house. She turned and ran back inside. The fire had grown, engulfing the walls and ceiling. Daisy's paws slipped on the scorched floor as she searched for Maggie, her ears straining to pick up any sound. A muffled groan guided her to the unconscious woman, slumped near the base of the stairs. Daisy tugged at Maggie's sleeve, pulling with all her might until she began to inch toward the door. The heat was unbearable, but Daisy didn't stop. Couldn't stop. With one final heave, Daisy dragged Maggie onto the front lawn, collapsing beside her as fresh air filled her burning lungs. The night erupted with the sounds of sirens as fire trucks pulled into the driveway, their flashing lights illuminating the soot-streaked faces of neighbors who had gathered to watch. Levi, cradled in a blanket by a paramedic, refused to let go of Daisy's collar. Maggie, coughing and dazed, reached out weakly for her son, her eyes landing on the scrappy dog lying at his side. Tears welled as the realization hit her. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice trembling. The firefighters worked tirelessly to contain the blaze, but the Bell family's home was reduced to smoldering ruins by dawn. Yet, amidst the ashes, something extraordinary had been forged. A bond, unspoken yet unbreakable, between a boy, his mother, and the stray dog who had risked everything to save them. The scent of antiseptic and the muffled sounds of distant conversations filtered into Maggie Bell's consciousness as she stirred awake. Her body felt heavy, her throat raw, and for a fleeting moment she couldn't place where she was. Then it hit her. Smoke, flames, the suffocating heat of the fire. Levi. Her eyes flew open, panic surging through her until she saw him. Levi sat beside her hospital bed, his face streaked with soot but calm now, his small hands clutching the collar of a scruffy dog. Daisy. Relief washed over her like a wave, leaving her weak. "You're awake," came a warm, familiar voice. Maggie turned to see Dr. Henry Fields, the town's doctor and an old friend of her late parents. His kind eyes softened as he pulled a chair closer. "You gave us a scare, Maggie." Maggie tried to speak, but her throat protested, forcing her to settle for a nod. "Levi's fine," Henry assured her, anticipating her first question. "A little shaken, but no serious injuries. You've got some burns and smoke inhalation, but you'll recover, physically at least." Her eyes shifted to Levi, who was now gently petting Daisy's head. "Daisy saved us," Levi said softly, his voice filled with awe. "She's a hero." Henry smiled, but didn't correct him. "That dog certainly earned her keep last night. You're lucky she was there." Lucky. The word felt heavy to Maggie. She'd narrowly escaped losing everything, her son, her home, her life. Her hand trembled as she reached out for Levi, who immediately took it. Daisy perked up, her ears twitching as she looked between mother and son, her amber eyes seeming to ask if they were okay. The next few days passed in a haze of exhaustion and uncertainty. Maggie and Levi were discharged from the clinic and moved temporarily into their elderly neighbor Edith Willard's guest house. The small cottage smelled faintly of lavender and freshly baked bread, a comforting contrast to the chaos of the fire. Edith bustled around them with the kind of no-nonsense energy only she could muster, ensuring they had food, blankets, and warm tea at all times. "You'll get back on your feet, Maggie," Edith said one evening as they sat together in the cramped living room. "You've been through worse, and you've always come out stronger." Maggie smiled weakly, though her mind raced with worries. The firefighters had confirmed the fire started due to faulty wiring, an oversight she hadn't noticed. The guilt weighed heavily on her. What kind of mother misses something so critical? Levi, meanwhile, had barely left Daisy's side. He insisted she sleep in his room, curling up with her on a makeshift bed of blankets. Maggie often peeked in at night to find Levi murmuring to Daisy, his tiny hands buried in her fur. Daisy listened, her head tilted as if understanding every word. "She makes him feel safe," Edith observed one morning as Maggie watched Levi and Daisy playing in the yard. "Maybe you need her as much as he does." Maggie didn't respond. She wasn't sure how to explain the gnawing fear that she couldn't take on one more responsibility, not when she was barely holding things together. Yet, seeing Levi's smile, a rare sight since the fire, made her hesitate every time she considered finding Daisy another home. Word of Daisy's heroics spread quickly through Lone Pine, and it wasn't long before neighbors began stopping by Edith's house with casseroles, baked goods, and donations. The dog that saved Levi had become a local celebrity, and people were eager to show their support. Even Deputy Caleb Rourke paid a visit, tipping his hat as he stepped onto the porch. "Maggie, I just wanted to check in. The fire was rough, but the community's got your back." His gaze fell to Daisy, who sat protectively at Levi's feet. "She's a special one," he said. "You might want to file for temporary ownership papers, just in case someone comes forward claiming her. A dog like that, well, people talk." Maggie nodded, though the idea of legal paperwork felt overwhelming on top of everything else. It was during one of these visits that June Harlow arrived. With her notepad and recorder in hand, the reporter from the Willamette Gazette seemed both curious and compassionate. She interviewed Maggie about the fire, asking about Levi and their recovery. But it was Daisy who captured her attention. "Do you know where she came from?" June asked, kneeling to get a closer look at the dog. Daisy flinched slightly, backing up as June moved her hand too quickly. The reporter frowned. "She has scars, and the way she reacts, it's like she's been through something." Maggie hadn't noticed the scars before, thin white lines etched into Daisy's legs and flank. A chill ran through her. What had this dog endured before finding them? "I don't know much about her," Maggie admitted. "She just showed up that night, like she was meant to be there." June nodded thoughtfully, scribbling notes. "I think there's more to her story," she said, "and I'd like to find out." Despite the growing attention, Maggie couldn't shake the weight of her worries. The insurance claim for the house would take weeks, if not months. The donations helped, but they wouldn't cover rebuilding a home. And then there was Daisy. Levi adored her, Maggie could see that. But what if keeping her was more than she could handle? One evening, as Levi slept and the house was quiet, Maggie sat with Edith on the porch. The stars were bright, scattered like diamonds against the dark canvas of the sky. "She's good for him," Edith said softly, sipping her tea. "And for you?" Maggie sighed. "I don't even know if I can afford to keep her. What if someone comes forward to claim her?" Edith placed a hand on Maggie's. "Sometimes things come into our lives for a reason. That dog didn't just save Levi. She's helping both of you heal. Maybe it's not about whether you can handle her. Maybe it's about what she's already done for you." Maggie looked out at the yard, where Daisy lay curled up near Levi's window, her ears twitching in sleep. For the first time in days, a small spark of hope flickered in her heart. Daisy had become a fixture in the Bells' lives, a quiet, watchful presence that seemed to anchor them in a time of uncertainty. For Levi, she was a constant companion, his protector in the wake of the fire. For Maggie, Daisy was more complicated. She had undeniably saved their lives, yet there were questions Maggie couldn't answer, questions that lingered like smoke in the corners of her mind. Where had Daisy come from? And what had left her so scarred, inside and out? June Harlow wasn't one to let questions go unanswered. Sitting at her cluttered desk, a half-empty mug of coffee at her elbow, she scoured reports of abandoned dogs in the surrounding counties. Her instincts as a journalist buzzed with the thrill of uncovering a story, though this time it felt personal. There was something about Daisy, those wary eyes, the faint scars etched into her fur, that hinted at a darker history. After hours of reading, June came across a report from a year earlier, a raid on a suspected dogfighting operation just 2 counties over. Several animals had been seized, though the report noted that others had fled during the chaos. One of the dogs was described as a brindle-colored female, medium size with a distinctive scar across her hind leg. June sat back, her mind racing. The description fit Daisy almost perfectly. She grabbed her phone and dialed the shelter listed in the report. A harried voice answered, belonging to a woman named Karen, who had worked at the shelter for over a decade. "We saw so many bad cases after that raid," Karen said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Some of those dogs had scars not just on their bodies, but in their minds, you know? The brindle one, though, she vanished before we could get to her. We thought she'd run off and, well, most dogs like that don't last long on their own." June felt a chill run through her. Daisy's survival wasn't just remarkable, it was miraculous. At Edith Willard's guest house, life was beginning to settle into a fragile routine. Levi and Daisy had become inseparable, their bond deepening each day. But Maggie had started noticing strange behaviors in Daisy, moments when her calm exterior cracked, revealing a glimpse of the fear buried within. One afternoon, as they walked to the mailbox, a car backfired in the distance. Daisy froze, her body rigid, her eyes wide with panic. She backed up slowly, trying to pull Levi with her. "It's okay, girl," Levi whispered, crouching beside her. He wrapped his arms around her neck, murmuring soothing words until she began to relax. Maggie watched the scene unfold, her heart aching. Whatever had happened to Daisy before she came to them had left its mark. Later that evening, Maggie noticed something else. Daisy shied away from Edith's neighbor, a man in his 60s who wore heavy work boots. Daisy's reaction was immediate and visceral. She tucked her tail, lowered her head, and slunk behind Maggie, trembling. "She's been hurt before," Edith said quietly, observing from the kitchen window. "Whoever did it, they left more than scars." Maggie's chest tightened. She knelt down, running her hand along Daisy's fur. "No one's going to hurt you again," she murmured, though she wasn't sure who she was reassuring, Daisy, Levi, or herself. The name Virgil Crow had a way of casting a shadow, even in Lone Pine. He was a man with a history, smirking mugshots in the local paper, whispered rumors of illegal dealings, and a general sense of unease wherever he went. When word of Daisy's heroics reached him, his interest was piqued, not for her bravery, but for her scars. Sitting in a dimly lit bar just outside town, Virgil listened as one of his associates described a brindle dog that matched Daisy's description. His smile was slow, calculated. "Sounds like she's mine," he said, tipping back his drink. "And I aim to get her back." Unaware of the growing danger, Levi was finding moments of joy with Daisy. He discovered her love for chasing a ball, her energy transforming in those moments of play. Watching her run, tail wagging and ears flopping, it was easy to forget the fear she carried. "Good girl," Levi cheered as she returned with the ball, dropping it at his feet. "You're the best dog ever." Daisy barked softly, her body language loose and happy, as if for a moment the weight of her past had lifted. Maggie stood on the porch, watching them. Despite her worries, she couldn't deny the positive effect Daisy had on her son. For the first time since the fire, Levi seemed like himself again. "You've got something special there," Edith said, stepping out with a mug of tea. "I'd say that dog was sent to you for a reason." Maggie nodded, her lips pressing into a faint smile. "Maybe," she said, though her thoughts were clouded with doubt. As the days passed, whispers began circulating through Lone Pine. A few neighbors speculated about Daisy's scars, murmuring about the possibility of her connection to dogfighting. While many rallied around the bells, others expressed unease. "You hear about that dog?" a man muttered to another over coffee at the diner. "Dog like that? You don't know what it's capable of." Levi overheard the conversation, his small hands balling into fists. He ran home, breathless, and found Maggie in the kitchen. "People are saying bad things about Daisy," he blurted out, tears welling in his eyes. "They're wrong, Mom. She's good." Maggie knelt down, holding his face in her hands. "I know, sweetheart, and so does Daisy. That's all that matters." But the unease grew when Maggie noticed an unfamiliar truck driving slowly past Edith's house one evening. Its driver didn't stop, but Maggie felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. Something about it didn't feel right. Later that night, June visited, her expression troubled. "I've been digging into Daisy's past," she said, spreading papers across the dining table. "There's a chance she escaped from a dog-fighting ring. If that's true, someone might come looking for her." Maggie's heart sank. The thought of losing Daisy, or worse, someone trying to take her, made her blood run cold. She looked over at Levi, who was curled up on the couch with Daisy, fast asleep. The dog's eyes opened briefly, meeting Maggie's. In them, she saw a silent plea. Daisy wasn't just a stray. She was part of their family now, and Maggie would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Daisy had begun to settle into life with the Bells, but her presence felt more significant than just another member of the household. For Levi, she was a source of unwavering comfort, her gentle demeanor anchoring him through the aftershocks of the fire. For Maggie, Daisy was something else entirely, both a puzzle and a gift she hadn't realized she needed. Levi sat on the porch steps one chilly morning, Daisy lying beside him with her head resting on her paws. He leaned down to whisper something into her ear. Daisy's tail thumped lightly against the wood, as if she understood every word. "She listens," Levi said, looking up as Maggie stepped outside with a mug of tea. Really listens, not like people do." Maggie paused, her heart softening at the sight of her son smiling for the first time in days. "Maybe that's her superpower," she said, taking a seat beside him. Daisy shifted to nuzzle Levi's hand, her eyes closing in contentment. "Do you think she gets scared too?" Levi asked quietly. Maggie hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I think everyone gets scared sometimes, even Daisy," she said finally. "But she's brave, just like you." Levi didn't respond, but the way he leaned closer to Daisy spoke volumes. Over the following days, Levi and Daisy developed a routine. Every morning they walked to the edge of Edith's property, Daisy trotting confidently at Levi's side. He threw sticks for her to chase, and though she didn't always fetch them, she seemed to enjoy the game. At night, Levi told Daisy stories about his favorite books, his memories of family camping trips, and his lingering fears about the fire. Daisy listened intently, her ears twitching, and her presence seemed to steady him. Maggie watched these moments from a distance, feeling a mix of gratitude and apprehension. Daisy had done so much for them already, but the shadows of her past loomed large. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was carrying something heavy, something that might catch up to all of them. It wasn't long before those shadows began to take shape. One afternoon, while Maggie was hanging laundry on Edith's line, she noticed a truck parked down the road. The man in the driver's seat was watching her, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. Maggie's stomach twisted. She recognized him from the diner, a man with a reputation, though she couldn't recall his name. "Virgil Crowe," Edith said grimly when Maggie mentioned the encounter later. "He's trouble. Always has been." Maggie felt a shiver run through her. "Why would he be watching us?" "I don't know," Edith admitted, her expression hard. "But you'd better be careful." Deputy Caleb Rourke stopped by that evening, his patrol car crunching over the gravel driveway. "Maggie," he said as he stepped out, adjusting his hat. "I've been hearing some things. Virgil Crow's been asking around about a brindle dog. Matches Daisy's description." Maggie's chest tightened. "Why?" Caleb hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Crow's been tied to dog-fighting rings in the past. Nothing we could pin on him, but he's bad news. If Daisy escaped from one of his operations, he might try to get her back." The thought made Maggie feel physically ill. She looked over at Levi, who was playing with Daisy in the yard, oblivious to the conversation. "Is there anything I can do to protect her?" Maggie asked. Caleb nodded. "File for legal ownership. It's not foolproof, but it'll make it harder for anyone to claim her without a fight." Maggie swallowed hard. "I'll do it." That night, as Levi and Daisy played near the edge of the woods, Daisy's behavior shifted suddenly. Her ears perked, and she barked sharply, running toward the tree line. Levi froze, startled by her change in demeanor. "Daisy!" he called, his voice trembling. Maggie, hearing the commotion, rushed outside in time to see Daisy circling protectively around Levi, her body tense. Maggie's eyes scanned the woods, but saw nothing. Still, the unease in Daisy's posture was undeniable. "Come inside," Maggie said firmly, ushering Levi and Daisy back toward the house. She couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been watching. As the days passed, the whispers in town grew louder. Some neighbors expressed concern about Daisy's past, fearing she might be dangerous. Others rallied around the bells, praising Daisy's bravery and urging Maggie to keep her. "She saved your lives," Edith said one evening over tea, "and now it's your turn to save hers." Maggie felt the weight of those words. Daisy had become so much more than just a stray dog. She was a part of their family, a calming presence for Levi, and a source of strength Maggie hadn't realized she needed. The decision to file for legal custody came late one evening after June Harlow stopped by with more troubling news. She had uncovered additional evidence linking Virgil Crow to illegal dogfighting and suspected he had been the owner of several missing dogs, including one that matched Daisy's description. "Maggie, if you want to protect her, you need to act now," June said, her tone urgent. "Crow won't stop until he gets what he wants." The next morning, Maggie sat in the courthouse, filling out the paperwork with trembling hands. Every stroke of the pen felt like a promise, not just to Daisy, but to Levi and herself. She wouldn't let anyone take this dog away, not after everything they'd been through. Outside, Levi and Daisy sat on a bench, the boy leaning against her side. Daisy's tail wagged gently as she watched Maggie through the courthouse window. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew one thing for certain. She was home. The morning air was heavy, and Maggie Bell's hands trembled as she unfolded the envelope that had arrived on Edith's doorstep. The official-looking document inside bore Virgil Crow's name, his claim written in bold, menacing letters. "Petition to recover property. Canine, brindle, female." Maggie's heart sank. Property. The word was cruel, reducing Daisy, who had become so much more than a dog, to something disposable. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the page. Virgil was asserting that Daisy was his, citing vague proof of prior ownership. The thought of losing Daisy, of handing her back to someone who clearly meant her harm, was unbearable. "Ma, what's wrong?" Levi's voice came from the doorway, soft but tinged with concern. Maggie folded the letter quickly, forcing a tight smile. "Nothing, sweetie, just some paperwork." Levi's gaze shifted to Daisy, who lay by the couch, chewing lazily on a toy. "Is it about Daisy?" he asked, his voice sharpening with fear. Before Maggie could answer, the familiar crunch of tires on gravel announced Deputy Caleb Rourke's arrival. He stepped out of his patrol car, his expression grim. "Maggie, can we talk?" Caleb said, tipping his hat as he walked up the porch steps. Levi clung to Daisy's collar, his small frame tense. Maggie motioned for him to take Daisy to the yard. "She can hear it, Mum," Levi said firmly. "She's part of this." Maggie sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the situation. "Okay, but let me handle it, Levi." Inside, Caleb explained the stakes. Virgil's claiming prior ownership. He's got forged documents, shady, but enough to drag this into court. Maggie's jaw tightened. "Can he win?" Caleb hesitated. "It depends. If you're willing to fight, we've got a chance. But Maggie, you need legal representation, and fast." By evening, the town was buzzing. Lone Pine had always been small enough that news traveled faster than the wind. Some residents supported Maggie, rallying around Daisy's heroism. Others questioned whether she was doing the right thing, their voices laced with skepticism and judgment. "You're wasting resources on a dog," one man muttered at the diner. "What about people who need help?" "That dog saved a life," countered another. "That's more than most people in this town can say." Maggie kept her head down, but the whispers cut deep. She couldn't focus on gossip. Her priority was Daisy. Sitting at Edith's kitchen table, she called June Harlow. "I need help," Maggie said, her voice shaking. "I can't let Virgil win." June arrived within the hour, her notepad and recorder in hand. "We'll fight this," she said firmly. "I've already got leads on Daisy's past, and I'll dig deeper. This guy doesn't get to walk away." The community's support took a surprising turn when Matthew Briggs, a local attorney, knocked on Maggie's door. "I heard about your case," he said. "I'd like to help. Pro bono." Maggie's relief was immediate, though her pride hesitated. "I don't know if I can pay—" "Don't worry about that," Briggs interrupted. "This isn't just about Daisy. It's about standing up to people like Virgil Crow." The preparation for court began in earnest. Levi sat at the table, clutching a crayon-drawn picture of Daisy, while Maggie and Briggs reviewed paperwork. Daisy lay at Levi's feet, her eyes flicking toward him every time he shifted. "You're going to tell them how she saved you, right?" Levi asked, his voice steady but filled with hope. "That'll make them understand." Maggie nodded, though her stomach churned at the thought of Levi testifying. "We'll make sure they hear everything, sweetheart." The courtroom was a small, stark space that felt both intimidating and oddly intimate. Virgil sat at the opposing table, his smirk thinly veiled. Maggie fought the urge to glare at him, focusing instead on Daisy, who sat quietly at Levi's side. Virgil's attorney opened with confidence, presenting forged documents that painted a picture of Daisy as an asset he had lost months ago. He spoke of dog training and ownership, using cold, detached language that made Maggie's blood boil. When it was Levi's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. He climbed onto the chair, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. "Daisy saved me," he began, his voice trembling but clear. "When the fire started, I couldn't move. I was too scared. But Daisy, she pulled me out. She didn't leave me, and I won't leave her." The judge leaned forward, his expression softening. Levi's words hung in the air, raw and unshakable. June and her intern, Harper Lane, provided additional evidence, tying Virgil to the illegal dogfighting ring. Harper's late-night discovery of a former worker willing to testify against Virgil became the case's turning point. The man took the stand, his voice rough but resolute. "I saw what he did to those dogs. Daisy was one of them. She escaped because she was smart and lucky." Virgil's calm facade cracked, his eyes narrowing into slits as the testimony unraveled his case. The verdict came 2 tense days later. Maggie barely breathed as the judge delivered the decision. Based on the evidence presented, ownership of the dog, now known as Daisy, is granted to Maggie Bell. Furthermore, I am referring all evidence of Mr. Crow's involvement in illegal activities to the district attorney's office." A collective exhale swept through the room. Maggie hugged Levi tightly, tears streaming down her face. Daisy, sensing the relief, nudged Levi with her nose, her tail wagging slowly. Virgil stood, his face a mask of fury. "This isn't over!" he hissed, storming out of the courtroom. Maggie knew the fight wasn't entirely won, but for now, Daisy was safe. As they stepped outside, Levi knelt beside Daisy, wrapping his arms around her. "We're your family now," he whispered. "No one's taking you away." Daisy licked his cheek, her eyes shining with gratitude. The night was still, the kind of silence that felt unnerving in the small town of Lone Pine. Daisy lay curled up at the foot of Levi's bed in Edith Willard's guest house, her rhythmic breathing the only sound in the room. Levi, though asleep, gripped the corner of her blanket tightly, as if even in dreams he couldn't bear to let her go. But outside, danger lurked. Virgil Crow sat in the driver's seat of his battered truck, parked under the cover of trees at the edge of the property, his jaw clenched as he watched the lights in Edith's house flicker out. The humiliation of losing the court case simmered in his chest, fueling a dangerous resolve. Daisy was a loose end, a living reminder of his crimes, and he intended to tie up that loose end tonight. Hours later, long after everyone inside had gone to bed, Virgil and a younger accomplice crept through the yard. Virgil's heavy boots crunched faintly on the gravel, his accomplice glancing nervously over his shoulder. "She's just a dog," the younger man whispered. "What's the big deal?" "She's my dog," Virgil hissed, his voice low but venomous, "and she knows too much." When they reached the door leading to the laundry room where Daisy often slept, Virgil paused. He rapped his knuckles against the wood lightly, his voice taking on a deceptively kind tone. "Here, girl. It's me." Inside, Daisy stirred. The sound of his voice sent a chill down her spine, an echo of her past rushing to the forefront. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her body froze. Memories of harsh commands, heavy boots and cold cages paralyzed her as Virgil slipped through the door. Levi stirred faintly in his sleep, but Daisy didn't make a sound as Virgil looped a rope around her neck. "Easy now," he muttered, tugging her toward the door. Daisy's body moved reluctantly, her fear outweighing any urge to resist. By the time the sun began to rise, Daisy was gone. Maggie knew something was wrong the moment she woke. The house felt eerily quiet, and the sight of Levi standing in the living room, tears streaming down his face, confirmed her worst fear. "She's gone, Mum," Levi cried, his voice breaking. "I couldn't stop them." Maggie's heart clenched as she pulled him into a hug. "It's not your fault, sweetheart," she whispered, though her own guilt gnawed at her. "We'll find her. I promise." Caleb Rourke arrived within the hour, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. "It's Crow," he said without hesitation. "No one else would go to these lengths." "But how do we find him?" Maggie asked, desperation creeping into her voice. Caleb adjusted his hat. "We'll follow every lead we've got. Crow can't hide forever." Daisy sat in the back of Virgil's truck, the wind whipping through the cracks in the metal bed. Her body was stiff, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. But as fear ebbed, instinct began to take over. Her claws scraped at the truck bed, leaving faint marks in the paint. She shook her body, letting tufts of fur catch in the wind. Every movement was deliberate, small signs for anyone who might come looking. When the truck finally stopped, Virgil yanked her out roughly, dragging her toward a dilapidated cabin hidden deep in the woods. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and Daisy's heart raced, but she remained alert, watching for an opening. Inside the cabin, Virgil tied her to a post, the rope frayed but strong. Daisy sat still, her eyes scanning the room. When Virgil stepped outside to make a call, she began gnawing at the rope, her teeth working with quiet determination. Back in Lone Pine, the bells had mobilized the community. Flyers with Daisy's picture appeared on telephone poles and shop windows. June Harlow worked tirelessly, using her connections to gather information about Virgil's possible hideouts. Levi, though scared, insisted on helping. He rode along with Caleb and Maggie as they searched the outskirts of town, his small voice unwavering. "She's out there," he said. "We have to keep looking." It was June who found the breakthrough, a map of Virgil's suspected dogfighting routes, tucked away in an old police file. One of the locations marked was a remote cabin deep in the forest. "That's where he'll be," Caleb said, his voice resolute. "Let's move." By the time Daisy chewed through the rope, the sun was setting. She bolted from the cabin, her paws kicking up leaves as she ran. Virgil's shouts echoed behind her, followed by the beam of a flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Get back here, you mutt!" he bellowed. Daisy didn't look back. Her instincts guided her, weaving through the trees and leaving a trail of broken branches and paw prints. But the sound of Virgil's heavy footsteps grew closer, his curses punctuating the stillness of the forest. At the edge of the woods, Maggie, Caleb, and Levi arrived, their flashlights sweeping through the underbrush. Levi's voice broke the quiet. "Daisy! Daisy, where are you?" A distant bark answered, faint but unmistakable. Levi took off running, Maggie and Caleb close behind. The beams of their flashlights caught the scene ahead. Daisy emerging from the trees, her fur matted, but her eyes bright with determination. Behind her, Virgil stormed forward, a length of rope in his hand. "Stop right there!" Caleb barked, drawing his weapon. Virgil froze, his expression twisting into anger as Caleb moved to restrain him. "You've got no idea what you're messing with," Virgil growled. But Caleb ignored him, snapping handcuffs into place. Levi ran to Daisy, throwing his arms around her neck as tears streamed down his face. "You're okay," he whispered. "You're okay now." Maggie knelt beside them, her hands trembling as she stroked Daisy's fur. "We've got you," she said softly. "You're safe." By the time they returned to Lone Pine, the whole town seemed to be waiting. Cheers erupted as the bells stepped out of Caleb's patrol car, Daisy at their side. "She's a fighter," Edith said, hugging Maggie tightly. "Just like you." But even as the community celebrated, Maggie felt a lingering unease. Virgil might be behind bars, but his reach and the secrets he carried still cast a shadow over their lives. Daisy, however, seemed at peace. She lay at Levi's feet that night, her eyes closing with a contentment Maggie hadn't seen before. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The quiet of Edith Willard's guest house was a welcome reprieve after the chaos of the past few days. Daisy lay on a quilt in the living room, her body curled protectively near Levi as he slept. Maggie sat nearby, a steaming mug of tea in her hands, her thoughts swirling. The weight of everything they had endured felt heavy tonight. But for the first time, she allowed herself to feel something else: relief. Daisy's rhythmic breathing filled the room, soothing and steady. Levi had insisted on sleeping next to her, refusing to let her out of his sight. Maggie couldn't blame him. In many ways, Daisy had become the glue holding their little family together. "Good girl," Maggie whispered, reaching out to stroke Daisy's fur. Daisy's tail wagged softly, her eyes flickering open for a brief moment before settling back into sleep. The next morning, Levi woke with a smile. For the first time since the fire, he hadn't been plagued by nightmares. He bounded into the kitchen where Maggie was flipping pancakes. "Daisy's so happy today," he exclaimed, his excitement infectious. "I think she knows she's home." Maggie smiled, though her heart ached with the memory of what it had taken to bring Daisy back. "Maybe she does," she said, ruffling Levi's hair. "And I think she knows how much we love her." Word of Daisy's safe return spread quickly through Lone Pine, and it wasn't long before the townspeople decided to celebrate. That Saturday, the Lone Pine Diner buzzed with energy as neighbors gathered to honor Daisy. Streamers hung from the ceiling, and a banner reading, "Thank you, Daisy," stretched across the wall. Edith Willard stood at the front of the room, a glass of lemonade in her hand. "This little dog reminds us of what it means to be brave," she said, her voice steady and warm. She faced fear and danger, not for herself, but for those she loves. That's a lesson we can all carry with us. The crowd erupted into applause, and Levi beamed with pride. He stood on a chair holding Daisy's leash. "She's not just my dog," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "She's my best friend." Maggie wiped a tear from her cheek, her heart swelling with pride. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. The highlight of the evening came when Deputy Caleb Rourke stepped forward with a small box. Inside was an honorary medal, engraved with Daisy's name and the words, "For courage and loyalty." "Daisy's actions remind us of the extraordinary bond between humans and animals," Caleb said, kneeling to attach the medal to Daisy's collar. The room grew quiet as Daisy, ever calm and composed, nuzzled Caleb's hand. A photographer from the Willamette Gazette snapped a picture of Levi holding Daisy, the medal gleaming under the diner's lights. The image made its way to the paper's front page the next day, spreading Daisy's story beyond Lone Pine. June Harlow's article, titled "From the Ashes, A Hero Dog's Journey," painted a vivid picture of Daisy's life. She detailed the scars of Daisy's past, the heroism that saved Maggie and Levi, and the resilience that brought her home. The story sparked an outpouring of letters and emails, many offering support for abused and abandoned animals. "This could be the start of something bigger," June said one afternoon, sitting at Edith's kitchen table with Maggie. "People want to help. They just need a reason." Maggie nodded, her gaze drifting to Daisy, who lay at Levi's feet. "She's given us that reason," she said softly, "and I won't let her down." As life slowly returned to normal, Maggie began volunteering at the Lone Pine Animal Shelter. Edith joined her, sharing stories and advice with the staff. Together they organized food drives, adoption events, and workshops on animal care. Levi, inspired by Daisy's resilience, began thriving at school. He told his classmates about her during show and tell, his confidence growing with each story. One afternoon he sat on the porch, a piece of paper in his lap. "What are you writing?" Maggie asked, sitting beside him. "A letter to Daisy," Levi said, his cheeks flushing. "To tell her how much she means to me." Maggie smiled, her heart aching with pride. "I think she'll love it." Daisy, too, was healing. Though still wary of unfamiliar men, she began to show signs of trust. On walks with Levi, she held her head higher, her stride more confident. One evening, she surprised everyone by approaching Caleb, wagging her tail as he crouched to pet her. "She's coming around," Caleb said, glancing at Maggie. "You've done good by her." Maggie smiled, her eyes meeting Caleb's. "She's done good by us." Despite the joy, there was a lingering sense of unease. Virgil Crow was in custody, but his accomplices remained at large. Caleb suggested installing cameras at Edith's house, and Maggie agreed, determined to protect the family they had built. But even with the shadows of Virgil's crimes hanging over them, the Bells found strength in each other, and in Daisy. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Maggie and Levi took Daisy for a walk through the woods. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Levi ran ahead, throwing a stick for Daisy, who bounded after it with enthusiasm. Maggie watched them, her heart full. "She's changed everything," she said quietly. Levi turned, his face glowing with happiness. We changed each other. As they walked home, Maggie felt a deep sense of gratitude. Their lives were far from perfect, but they were whole. And for that, she would always be thankful. The morning air in Lone Pine was crisp and clear, a peaceful backdrop to the Bells' new routine. Levi tugged his backpack over his shoulder, Daisy padding dutifully at his side as they walked to school. Her presence, steady and calm, had become an essential part of their mornings. She waited patiently at the gate each day, wagging her tail as Levi said goodbye, before accompanying Maggie on the walk back home. But this morning, something felt off. Maggie couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that prickled at her neck. It grew stronger when she spotted a black truck idling near the animal shelter, two unfamiliar men leaning against it. Their eyes followed her and Daisy as they passed. Maggie's steps faltered. She tried to act casual, her hand tightening on Daisy's leash. Daisy growled softly, her ears twitching in warning. When Maggie returned home, she immediately called Caleb Rourke. He arrived quickly, his cruiser kicking up a trail of dust as he parked in front of Edith's house. They didn't do anything, Maggie explained, her voice uneasy. But they were watching. I'll look into it, Caleb assured her, adjusting his belt. But keep an eye out, Maggie. Something tells me this isn't over. That evening, Maggie drove to the Lone Pine Animal Shelter, her mind still replaying the morning's events. As she pulled into the lot, her stomach dropped. The shelter's walls were defaced with red spray paint, the words "Keep Out" glaring under the dim light of the street lamp. The windows were shattered and supplies were scattered across the yard. Who would do this? Maggie whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped out of the car. Edith arrived moments later, wrapping Maggie in a firm hug. We'll fix this, she said, her voice resolute. They won't scare us away. June Harlow joined them shortly after, snapping photos of the damage. This isn't random, she said grimly. These men, whoever they are, have a purpose. Caleb reinforced the shelter's security the next day, installing cameras and stronger locks. But the damage was done. Maggie couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and Daisy seemed to sense it too. Her once relaxed demeanor had shifted. She stayed close to Maggie, growling softly at every unfamiliar sound. Late one night, Maggie woke to Daisy barking fiercely. She rushed to the window, her heart pounding as she spotted two men in the backyard. They were trying to pry open the gate, their figures silhouetted against the moonlight. Levi, stay in your room, Maggie called, grabbing her phone to dial Caleb. Daisy was already outside, her barks sharp and commanding. She charged at the intruders, her presence enough to send them scrambling back to their truck. When Caleb arrived minutes later, he found tire tracks leading into the woods. They're testing you, he said, his expression dark. But Daisy scared them off this time. Maggie knelt beside Daisy, running her hands through her fur. Good girl, she murmured, her voice trembling. You saved us again. As the days passed, June's investigation uncovered the identities of the two men, George Ricketts and Tom Doyle, both with records for animal cruelty and theft. They were known associates of Virgil Crowe, and their recent activities hinted at plans to revive the dogfighting operation. Armed with this information, Caleb filed a report and rallied additional support from local law enforcement. The town, now fully aware of the threats, banded together to protect the shelter and the Bells. Despite the precautions, the final confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. Maggie, Levi, and Daisy were at the shelter late one evening, sorting donations from the community. The night was quiet, the kind of stillness that always put Maggie on edge. Daisy, however, was anything but calm. She paced near the door, her ears perked and her growls low. Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. Two figures loomed in the shadows, attempting to force their way inside. "Stay behind me," Maggie whispered, pushing Levi toward a corner. She grabbed her phone and called Caleb, her hands shaking as she described the situation. Daisy was already in motion. She stood at the door, her body rigid as she barked ferociously. When one of the men tried to push through, Daisy lunged, her teeth snapping just inches from his arm. The man recoiled, shouting in panic, "Maggie, hold tight, we're on our way!" Caleb's voice was steady through the phone. Minutes felt like hours as Daisy held her ground, her presence preventing the intruders from gaining entry. When Caleb arrived with backup, the men tried to flee but were quickly apprehended. "Stay down!" Caleb barked, pinning one of the men to the ground. The other was handcuffed by a deputy, his curses falling on deaf ears. Levi rushed to Daisy, wrapping his arms around her as tears streamed down his face. "You did it," he whispered. "You kept us safe." The arrests brought a wave of relief to Lone Pine. With the accomplices in custody, additional charges were filed against Virgil Crow, ensuring he would remain behind bars for years to come. The shelter received an outpouring of support, with volunteers and donations flooding in. Maggie stood on the shelter's steps one sunny afternoon, watching as Levi played with Daisy in the yard. She felt a sense of closure she hadn't known she needed. "You're safe now," Levi told Daisy, his voice soft but sure. "Just like you made us safe." Daisy's eyes met Levi's, her tail wagging gently. For the first time since Maggie had met her, Daisy looked truly at peace. The crisp morning air in Lone Pine carried a buzz of excitement. The town park was alive with energy, children running between rows of folding chairs while townspeople gathered near a small stage. At the center of it all stood Maggie and Levi, with Daisy sitting proudly between them. Her honorary medal caught the sunlight, a quiet testament to the journey that had brought them here. Today was no ordinary day. The town had come together to honor Daisy, unveiling a bronze statue in her likeness, a symbol of courage and the unyielding bond between humans and animals. As the mayor stepped up to the microphone, the crowd fell silent. "Today, we celebrate not just a dog but a hero," the mayor began. "Daisy reminded us all what it means to stand by those we love, no matter the odds." Applause filled the air as the statue was revealed. It depicted Daisy mid-stride, her gaze steady and determined, as if she were still guarding the ones she loved. Levi beamed with pride as he took the microphone next. "She's more than a hero to me," Levi said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "She's my best friend and my greatest teacher. She showed me how to be brave, even when it's scary, and to never give up on the people or animals you love." Maggie wiped tears from her eyes as the crowd erupted in cheers, the sound echoing across the park. June Harlow stood at the back of the gathering, taking notes as the event unfolded. Her article on Daisy had gone far beyond Lone Pine, capturing hearts across the country. Calls and emails flooded her inbox daily. Animal advocacy groups, shelters, even national publications wanting to share Daisy's story. "Looks like you've got another headline on your hands," Edith Willard teased, nudging June with her elbow. June laughed. "This isn't just a story anymore," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "It's a movement." The movement was already gaining momentum. June had been invited to speak at a state animal welfare conference where she would share Daisy's journey and its impact on both her career and her outlook on life. "She changed everything for me," June had written in her keynote draft. "Sometimes a single act of bravery can ripple out and change the world." Back at the Lone Pine Animal Shelter, Maggie found herself taking on more responsibilities. The shelter, once a modest operation, now thrived thanks to the donations and attention generated by Daisy's story. Maggie had launched a scholarship fund for aspiring veterinarians, named in Daisy's honor, to ensure the next generation of animal advocates had the resources they needed. "This is just the beginning," Maggie told Edith one afternoon as they sorted through the shelter's new supplies. "We owe it to Daisy, and every animal like her, to make this count." Edith, ever the optimist, gave her a knowing smile. "You found your calling, Maggie." Levi, too, was thriving. At school, he gave a presentation about Daisy, recounting how she had saved his life, not just from the fire, but from the fear and sadness that had followed. His classmates hung on his every word, their eyes wide with admiration. "Daisy taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Levi said, his voice steady. "It means you keep going anyway." The presentation sparked a school-wide campaign to support the local shelter, with students organizing fundraisers and collecting supplies. For the first time in months, Levi felt confident and capable, his bond with Daisy fueling his newfound sense of purpose. The ripple effects of Daisy's story extended far beyond Lone Pine. At the state capitol, lawmakers introduced new regulations on animal cruelty, inspired by the attention Daisy's case had garnered. Maggie and June attended the signing ceremony, standing alongside other advocates as the governor praised their efforts. "This isn't just about justice for Daisy," Maggie said during a press interview afterward. "It's about creating a safer world for all animals, so no one has to endure what she went through." Back in Lone Pine, the community celebrated another milestone. Levi and Daisy participated in the town's annual parade, with Daisy leading the way in a wagon adorned with flowers. She wore her medal proudly, while Levi walked beside her, waving to the cheering crowd. As they rounded the corner near the park, Levi glanced down at Daisy. "You're amazing, you know that," he whispered, his hand brushing her fur. Daisy wagged her tail, her gaze steady and full of trust. The day ended with a quiet walk through the woods. Maggie, Levi, and Daisy strolled along a familiar path, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the trees. Levi ran ahead, tossing sticks for Daisy, whose joyful bark echoed through the forest. Maggie watched them with a deep sense of contentment. "You didn't just save us, Daisy," she said softly, her voice carrying in the stillness. "You gave us a future." Daisy stopped for a moment, her ears perking up as if she understood. Then, with a playful bark, she bounded after Levi, her tail wagging as the two disappeared into the golden light. The sun rose gently over the woods, casting a warm glow through the trees as Maggie, Levi, and Daisy walked along a familiar trail. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Levi, now taller and more confident, kept a steady pace beside Daisy, whose steps had grown slower but no less determined. "You've taught me so much, girl," Levi said, his voice steady but soft. Daisy's ears twitched at his words, her tail giving a faint wag. Maggie, walking a few paces behind, watched them with a bittersweet smile. It had been years since the fire that had brought Daisy into their lives. So much had changed, but this walk, this quiet moment, felt like a bridge between then and now. Maggie glanced up at the canopy of leaves, whispering a silent thank you to the dog who had saved them in more ways than one. Later that morning, the Bells made their way to the park, where Daisy's statue stood in its place of honor. Levi carried a small bouquet of daisies, which he placed carefully at the statue's base. A few other families had gathered, children laughing and pointing at the bronze likeness of Daisy. "She's become a part of this town," Maggie said, her voice filled with pride. "She's not just our Daisy anymore. She belongs to everyone." Levi nodded, running his hand along the edge of the statue. "But she'll always be ours first." As they stood there, Edith Willard approached, her eyes crinkling with a warm smile. "You know, Maggie, that dog of yours did more than save lives. She brought this whole town together." Edith's gaze softened as she added, and she reminded us all what really matters. Caleb Rourke joined them moments later, tipping his hat in greeting. "Daisy's story changed things for me too," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I've started working on new cases, shutting down illegal operations, making sure animals like Daisy don't fall through the cracks again." "She'd be proud of you," Maggie said sincerely. Caleb chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "I'd like to think so." At home, Daisy had begun to show signs of slowing down. Maggie noticed her hesitating before climbing the porch steps and resting more often during their walks. Levi, ever attentive, made sure Daisy's bed was softer and her treats more plentiful. "She's getting older, isn't she?" Levi asked one evening as they sat by the fireplace. Maggie nodded, her heart heavy yet full of gratitude. "She's earned it," she said. "Every moment of rest, every bit of love, we'll give it all to her." Levi leaned down to scratch Daisy behind the ears. "You've done enough, Daisy," he whispered. "You can rest now." Levi's dreams of becoming a veterinarian had taken root in earnest. He spent his weekends at the Lone Pine Animal Shelter, renamed Daisy's Haven in honor of their beloved dog. Maggie, now running the shelter full-time, watched with pride as Levi worked with the rescue dogs, teaching them trust and patience. "You've grown so much," Maggie said one afternoon, watching Levi train a timid golden retriever. "Daisy would be proud." "She taught me everything I needed to know," Levi replied, his voice steady. "Now it's my turn to pass it on." One golden afternoon, Maggie, Levi, and Daisy ventured to their favorite spot by a quiet stream in the woods. Levi tossed pebbles into the water, watching the ripples spread across the surface. Daisy lay beside him, her head resting on his lap. "You've done more than enough, girl," Maggie said softly, her voice catching. "Rest easy." Daisy's eyes met Maggie's, full of trust and peace. Slowly, she closed them, her breathing steady and content. Levi leaned down, his hand on Daisy's fur. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." The stream babbled on, the sunlight dappling the forest floor as the bells sat together in quiet reflection. Years later, the legacy of Daisy's love and bravery endured. Levi, now a young adult, returned to Daisy's Haven to train a new rescue dog, his voice gentle yet confident. Maggie, standing nearby, marveled at how far they had come. The shelter thrived, its walls adorned with photos of Daisy and stories of other animals she had inspired. June Harlow's follow-up article captured the essence of Daisy's journey, emphasizing how one dog's courage had reshaped a family, a community, and even state laws. "Her bark still echoes," June wrote. "Not just in Lone Pine, but in every act of kindness inspired by her story." One evening, Levi walked to the edge of the woods, the place where so much of their journey had begun. The air was still, yet alive with the whispers of the forest. He paused, hearing a distant bark. His heart swelled, not with sadness, but with gratitude. Daisy was no longer by his side, but her presence was eternal, woven into every step he took. As Levi turned to head home, he whispered, "You're still here, Daisy. You'll always be here." And in the quiet of the woods, under the canopy of stars, Daisy's legacy lived on. As we reflect on Daisy's extraordinary journey, we're reminded of the profound bond between humans and animals, a bond built on trust, love, and courage. Daisy's story is not just one of survival, but of transformation. She taught us that even in the face of adversity, small acts of bravery can ripple out to create lasting change. Through her, we've seen how one life, no matter how humble, can inspire a family, unite a community, and spark a movement. But what about you? Have you ever experienced a moment where an animal's unconditional love or bravery changed your life? Do you think we, as a society, do enough to protect and honor animals like Daisy? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your stories and perspectives in the comments below. And if Daisy's story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Join us as we continue to share more inspiring tales of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable connection between humans and animals. Together, let's celebrate the power of second chances and the impact of compassion. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.